she. Yes. Yes. Hi, Miss Paris. How are you? Yes. Okay. He's failing. How can this be?
Too often, parents, students, and even some teachers are caught off guard by a student's poor or failing performance. It's time to fix this issue with the proper use of formative assessment.
Welcome, Apples and Chalk viewers. I'm Dana Harrison, and today our focus is formative assessment. Before we get started, we want you to take a quick quiz to see what you already know about formative assessment. All right, viewers, well, I hope you performed well on that quiz. Let's go over the answers. All of the terms provided to you in the quiz are essential to today's lesson on formative assessment. The first being formative assessment, the process. The process of formatively assessing a student is simply checking to see whether or not they understand instruction all throughout the lesson, but especially at the beginning of the lesson. It's important to formatively assess students at the beginning of the lesson because they might already know some of the things that you will teach. You want to clear up any misunderstandings that will only be exposed through formative assessment, especially at the beginning of the lesson. The next term we want to talk about is formative assessment, the assignment, totally different from the process. Formative assignments are those quizzes, games, discussion questions, and tools or learning activities that prompt students to provide to you what they have learned so far in a lesson. You want to take these so that they guide the rest of the lesson steps inside of your plan. It will also allow you to see your strengths and weaknesses as a teacher and maybe even schedule some tutoring sessions or supplemental instruction for a couple of students who lag behind while others seem to be progressing. Opposite of formative assessment is summative assessment. Summative assessments are totally different from formative assessments. These are assessments provided to a student at the end of a series of instruction. This means that they have been taught several concepts and skills, and now you, the teacher, are requiring them to combine those concepts and skills to demonstrate what they know and understand. Again, these are given at the end of instruction in a series of concepts and skills being taught. Summative assessments receive a heavier grade and you are searching for mastery, whereas in formative assessment, you're not really searching for mastery, but instead trying to make a benchmark so that you know where the student is headed after teaching. Last but certainly not least, formative feedback. Formative feedback is one of the most essential tools to an educator. This is the data collected after giving students a formative assignment. This data dictates where you will go next inside of your lesson. For a teacher, it reveals your strengths and weaknesses. For a student, it reveals their strengths and weaknesses. And for a parent, they get to see where his or her students lie in the learning process. They also use this information to dictate whether or not their students need supplemental instruction for better education. So why should we look at formative assessment? Well, because a lot of mistakes are being made by educators. Sometimes educators are teaching without giving any formative instruction at all. How do you know where a student is if you just start teaching? What do they already know? What might they be confused about? Another major issue in education is confusing formative assessment for summative assessment. Unfortunately, many students' grades suffer when they are given formative assessments and they're graded summatively. This means that they received a quiz or a review game or a discussion and were graded harshly or very impactfully for an assignment that was just meant to check their understanding. Another major issue, formative assessments are being given at the wrong time. They shouldn't just appear right before a major test, but they should appear, as we said before, all throughout learning, especially during the beginning of instruction. All right, so right now you might feel very motivated to step up your formative assessment game in the classroom. And you're asking yourself, well, how should I give my students formative assessments? What should they look like? Well, we have a couple of ideas here at Apples and Chalk. The first suggestion for us is simply a quiz. It doesn't have to be major. It could be a 5-question quiz. Let's say you want to check for understanding concerning terms that were overviewed during a previous lesson. Simply give the students a handout with 5 statements. Inside of a word bank, list the 5 terms that will go with those statements. Allow your students to place the terms where they belong inside of the statements. Give them about 5 to 10 minutes to complete the assignment. Immediately after, have the students work inside of groups to see whether or not all of them receive similar answers. And of course, after they've built their confidence up and clarified misunderstandings amongst themselves, you, the teacher, would stand and say, all right, let's go over questions 1 through 5. I'm going to give you the answers as we go through. This allows students to tell you what they wrote on their papers with the confidence and support of their peer groups. Again, this is a formative assessment in the style of a fill-in-the-blank quiz, provided the students have a word bank. Our second suggestion for formative assessments is the awesome in-class review game competition. So you should split your class up into however many groups you would like to see. Give each group a whiteboard and a dry erase marker. You, the teacher, have already prepared a list of review questions for whatever concept you're covering. You let the students know this is how the game is going to work. First, I am going to say the question. Immediately after, you are going to write down the answer with your group on the whiteboard. After you have your answer, you'll hold it up in the air. The first team to reveal their answer and put it in the air and is correct receives the point. If you don't have it correct, we'll go to the next group. And whoever has it correct in the order they appeared, they'll receive the point. So let's say nobody gets it right. You as the teacher secretly note that's a weakness that you need to clarify in subsequent lessons. But for the students, you provide them with the answer and continue to advance the game forward. Our third suggestion is a matching game that requires students to match any type of term. Our third suggestion is a matching game. Let's say you are a math teacher and you just taught your students a series of different modes of operation. You want to identify whether or not they know the difference between addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division being used when someone's applying math skills to daily routines. So you provide your students with several slips of paper, and on each slip of paper you give a scenario in which the students have to read the scenario and then match the operation to it. It would be even better if you provided them with construction paper where they could glue each scenario and have a corresponding term so that you can see it and they can take that home as a study tool. From crossword puzzles to word searches, there are so many ways to creatively and formatively assess your students. We mentioned earlier that summative and formative assessments differ because of their grading patterns and how those are stored for a student's cumulative grade. Well, with formative assessments, again, you're not looking for mastery. So how should you actually grade these? Focus on completion. Give your students a series of steps outlined in a rubric for them to complete. If the students do well in completing all of those steps, the students should receive a high grade. Now, you might add on different things for grammar or punctuation or to see if they used appropriate signs or use the right formulas inside of a math class. And that's up to you and your style of teaching. But the students should definitely know prior to taking the formative assessment what you are looking for them to do so that they receive a great grade concerning completion. You're not looking for accuracy because accuracy is truly measured later on in the learning process. Let's think about it. If summative assessments are provided for mastery, then you're looking for accuracy during that time. You want to see whether or not a student understands in a formative assessment. That means there's a great chance that there won't be a lot of accuracy inside of it. If it is, awesome. You're ready to move on to the next step of your lesson. Before we close out this video, we want to formatively assess you and check to see whether or not you took away something from our lesson. So let's give you a scenario. You're an English teacher and it's Tuesday inside of your classroom. On Monday, you lectured your students on 2 different literary devices, one being symbolism, the other being an allusion inside of a text. At the top of Tuesday's class, you provide your students with the quiz and you say, students, I provided to you 2 short literary passages. I want you to write allusion beside the passage that uses an allusion and symbolism beside the passage that uses symbolism heavily inside of the text. You have 5 minutes. The students complete this quiz. You, the teacher, what do you do next with this formative assessment? All right, hopefully you did well, educators, on your formative assessment. Again, we asked you what to do after the given scenario, and there are a couple of things that you just have to do. So we want to give you an acronym so that you remember what to do after a formative assessment. AGDP. Answers: grades, data, parents. Answers: go over the answers with your students. This can be done aloud or it can be done in private, but you want to make sure you clear up what is right and what is wrong. Afterwards, you want to grade. Grade for completion and not necessarily accuracy. They're just not at that stage in the learning process. D, data. Use the data to drive all of the instruction that follows that formative assessment. And lastly, one of the most essential pieces to our puzzle in the learning environment, parents. You want to make sure the parents receive what the students' weaknesses and strengths are inside of the learning environment. Thank you so much for tuning in to another Apples and Chalk video. If you have any video suggestions, please include them in the comment section. Like us, subscribe to us as we continue to grow as teachers and educators in this pedagogical environment.